So I've got a canon to the polemics of the 2nd century. Theravada's great claim to fame was it had the original writings, it had the canon, it had books. We're respectable. You Mahayana, you like your religious experience, but you've got no books. And so the perfection of wisdom, the Prajna Paramita, this collection of early sutras, emerging 100 BC, culminating in the Heart Sutra, Lotus Sutra, Diamond Sutras, and then developing on as Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism is transmitted into China and Tibet and beyond to Japan and Mongolia. The perfection of wisdom in 8,000 verses is one of the early sutras, composed perhaps 100 BC, and is the first segment of this group of sutras. Here we see a picture of it, the perfection of wisdom, in 8,000 lines. That's how long the book is. And it's about claiming we're proper Buddhists like anyone else. My Buddha's sexier than yours, the polemics. Look at the Hindu-like iconography. If you compared the busty pictures here with female iconography in Hinduism, particularly so Mahayana Buddhism is competing not only with Theravada but also with Hinduism. So it's showing its distinctiveness from Theravadaism. It's competing with perhaps Hindu religion for devotees, for followers in 2nd century onwards. And so the Mahayana literature, the perfection of wisdom literature, like this particular perfection of wisdom literature, the Trekeya Sutta, introduces some key Mahayana themes, as well as some very interesting images. It elevates the bodhisattvas as the practitioners of the 6 perfections, the paramita, the virtues, things like sila, ethics, patience, and so on, and explains the Mahayana approach to the practice of meditation or jhana, and teaches the Trekeya doctrine. We see here a statue from East Java, Indonesia, to see how far Mahayana has travelled. So Mahayana is claiming my wisdom is better than your wisdom. My wisdom is more perfect than your wisdom. And as time went by, more and more material was added over the next couple of centuries from the 100 BC. The sutra itself, there was a summary in verse of the 11,000 verses called the Ratan Gu Samayaka Gatha, whatever that means. Between 100 and 300 CE, this text was expanded into large versions, into 10,000, 18,000, 25,000, 100,000 lines. The large perfection of wisdom, some of which we don't have any longer. These differ in as many lists. They're abbreviated or written out in full. And eventually these texts got so big, as bigger and bigger versions were produced of Mahayana wisdom, they became unwieldy and people just didn't read them. So they were summarized in these shorter versions, the most famous of which is the Heart Sutra, and the Diamond Sutra, which is the Vajrayana way, the third turning, the third yana. So we have competing scriptures, text wars, as it were. My sutta's longer than yours, my sutta's better than yours. According to Edward Collins, the perfection of wisdom sutras, the Pali Sutras, added from the Pali Sutras, added much more new doctrinal material. Well, of course, emptiness, sunyata, Buddha nature eventually, the Trekeya doctrine, in these larger and larger texts and stories and analogies that supported these doctrines. Increasingly, in the 1st and 2nd century AD, the sectarianism between emerging Mahayana and emerging Theravada groups, with all their rancor and invective and polemics, was there. Edward Conze talks about the increasing scholasticism there and the insertion of longer and longer Abhidharma lists, tit for tat, longer and longer texts, with growing stress on skill and means, upya, and its subsidiaries such as the Bodhisattva vow. That's a fascinating idea, that the Bodhisattva vow is a subsidiary, the larger idea of upya. And the 4 means of conversion and its logical sequences, such as the distinction between provisional and ultimate truth. The ultimate truth that there's no truth, everything is a false utterance. There was a growing concern within the Buddhist faith with its celestial Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and their Buddha fields. A tendency towards verbosity and repetitiveness and over-elaboration, like some people's essays, I guess. Lamentations over decline of the Dharma. Expositions of the hidden meaning, the secret meaning, which became more frequent and the more original material becomes obscured. That's an interesting way of putting it. The original material of the Pali Canon becomes obscured by these new teachings. Any reference to the Dharma body of the Buddha as anything different from a term for the collection of his teachings. And more detailed doctrine of the graded stages, the bhumis, the graded stages of the Bodhisattva's career. First 6, but then 10, and these get codified in statues and in particularly in the different levels of the Mahayana came to claim that their doctrine was better than the Theravada doctrine. The perfection of wisdom in 8,000 verses expounds the Trekeya doctrine. Its doctrine was very different. The 3 Kayas, especially Samkhya, that there's a celestial realm. That's very different than Theravada. Mahayana came to claim that my Buddhas, I got more Buddhas than you have. The Trekeya is not quite the Buddhist Trinity, but it is a Buddhaverse, as it were. Is the basis of Buddhist teaching on the nature of reality and Buddhahood. Look at these pictures here, the 3 Buddhist statues